Join us today on The Informer to discuss the Albanese's move to cut back staffing levels for the independents from 4 back to 1 is Ryan Smith, the Shadow Minister for Planning in Victoria, Mario Beeks, security consultant, ex-military Croatian officer and author of Blood and Soil, Caroline Council, family law expert, and of course, Ian Cook, famous of the infamous I Cook Foods Sludgate saga. Good morning, team.
Good day.
Morning, Michael.
Now, outcry, mainly from the independents and their supporters. Albanese's move to cut their advisors back from 4 to 1. Now, we're smart enough to know this wasn't a spur of the moment decision. He obviously went in thinking with the strategy, if we get in, we will do this. What's at play here? Ron, I'll start with you, given your position.
Well, I think, first of all, the one advisor has been the norm for many, many, many years, and it was Morrison who changed it for whatever reason that was. I do find it amusing that within the first month or so of these Teals coming into Parliament, that this is their biggest issue that they're dealing with at the moment. And already they will say that at the end of their 3-year term, they may even campaign against Labor because they haven't got what they want. So very quickly it's become about them. And I don't think it plays particularly well out in the community that they're demanding that they get what they see as their due. The reality is that, you've been put in as an independent, you've been put in as someone who does not have party backing and all the things that come with that. When you elect an MP from the Liberal Party or the Labor Party or even the Nationals and the Greens, we have dedicated spokespeople for different portfolio areas who are able to spend their time getting across the issues, talking to stakeholders. If you go in as an independent, you simply don't have that party support. But that's the platform you've gone in on, not having the party support. So to come and bleat now that it's a problem, to me, just smacks of someone or a group of people who see that they should be owed more than what I believe their due is.
Can I? Okay. I'm actually. I like Ryan, but I'm going to take a different opinion on this. What we have, and I would have much preferred that the Libs won in their own right, etc. So putting that to one side, what you have is the Australian population have voted for a whole bunch of independents. Albanese did not get in on any primary vote. He slipped through because of a preference scheme. That's how Albanese is in power now. Albanese now wants to reduce a group of people, albeit not coherent as in a party structure, but a group of people voted for by the Australian population. They were voted in to do a job, and that was to be the balance of power in the Senate. They have to be able to scrutinise legislation. Having just one person helping you and the amount of workload that these guys are under, that's not going to allow for proper scrutiny. This is Albanese playing out a Daniel Andrews playbook where if I reduce scrutiny, I can do what I like. And I think it is extremely dangerous. It's a bit like saying, I voted for this guy to come in and do this job for me, and that job is to drive the car. But Albanese, because he has the power, has said, well, that's okay. You voted for him. Yes, he's got a car, but we're not giving him any petrol. You can't do it.
But Ian, isn't that just going to play out in the next election badly for Albanese? Because I agree, he didn't get in because of any form of primary vote, but isn't he going to have a reputational problem, having gone from saying, I'm going to fix this, I'm going to work collaboratively with everybody, I'm the great guy here. Isn't it going to play badly for him eventually?
Yeah, can I add something? Can I add something on this one? I love Ryan Smith as well. And, no question asked. I really like you, Ryan. But I have a tendency to agree with Ian right now. What's the better modus operandi than the weaken the logistics of independence? And Ian said this very clearly. The independence, it's galore of independents being voted in Parliament and the Senate and everything else. And if you're reducing their capabilities, logistical capabilities to attend all these meetings, to understand all legislations and visiting their constituents, of course, it's going to look Labor as a major party in the Parliament and the Senate because they're going to It was going to depend on them, on their staffers, on their logistics and everything else. And that's what our prime minister forgot. He didn't get to vote on his own, as Ian says, primary vote, but there's a lot of independents which now that clearly their logistics is going to be weakened to that point that they'll not be able to attend everything and be present at every possible moment in time.
You know, the other point that I would make from my own, if you like, partisan or political point of view is that I would probably disagree with a whole heap of these independents, particularly the Green side of it, because I think, to a degree, I think they're lunatics. But you have to at least give them an opportunity to show their lunacy because you've educated them in whatever you're trying to put forward in legislation.
I appreciate everyone's kind words, and I don't mind that we disagree on this matter in the slightest. I just, as I say, people, the message is when you vote for someone without a party backing, you are voting for someone who doesn't have the structure behind them, the frameworks behind them, and people need to, I guess, understand that broadly that that's the case. I mean, like I say, it's only been in the last few years that independents have had those extra people. Like, this hasn't been a problem up until now. So when I look back, you know, I take on board exactly, Ian, Mario, what you've said, but no one was shouting from the rooftops 3 years ago when, and the decades before that, when independents only had one. Independents got by fine, didn't complain, and did their job. Now suddenly you're saying, well, they had them for a few years and now they should have them for eternity. Well, it wasn't a problem before. Why is it a problem?
My understanding is that Tony Abbott did this and then had to reverse it. Tony Abbott reduced their numbers to 1, which I find rather interesting, that you've got Tony Abbott, who I like, but is seen as a far right winger. Now you've got the leader of the left doing exactly the same thing. Now, Tony Abbott was the one who actually turned it around and let them have some more. I'm not suggesting that they should have mountains of staff, et cetera, but I think given the type of legislation that's going to be put forward, the agenda that the left of the Labor Party would like to push, I would really like to make sure that anyone in the upper house has the resources to scrutinise it and has the time to do it. You think of the hours that they sit and they've got one person giving them a hand. What, that one person's going to sit right through 2 weeks, 12 hours?
I disagree with they've got one person. They have 4 electorate staff. Now, I have, as a state MP, all state MPs have 2.5 full-time equivalents, 2.5 staff. When I become a shadow minister or anyone's appointed shadow minister, we don't get any more staff. We have to reallocate. I've still got 2.5 staff. I have to reallocate the duties around people. I have one now 4-day-a-week person who does all my policy work with me, and it's takes her away from constituent work, but that's just the reality of the situation. Now, the independents have 4 electorate staff, so 1.5 more than I do for their electorate. If they need, they've been given another person on top of that. So they've got 5 staff. How you allocate those resources is about being a good manager. How you allocate those resources between your electorate and your parliamentary duties is up to you as a manager to make sure that you do that. So they don't have one person, they have 5. They can use 3 of them for policy if that's what they choose to do. It's up to an MP as a good manager of the resources they're given to make sure they're allocated the way that they need to be.
That's
getting 8 staff as an MP starts being a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. With that one, Ryan, I agree. I believe that government wants to save the money. No question asked about this one. And as you remember, you know, our discussion prior election, how the landscape of the election is going to look like. And we all agree that going to be a lot of independence. And a lot of independence actually speaks the volume what constituents wants. You know, I mean, they can't choose from left and right. But I can incline towards that one, Ryan, that we need to be careful how many staffers they get. You know, I mean, 8 is far too much for the one person. That is like little army around the one person. And on the hindsight, I believe the government wants to save the money as well on that expense on the staffers.
Mario, it's going to be interesting to see the budget in terms of what other planned cuts and whether the government is going to also suffer some cuts. I agree with you. It's having heard from Ryan and how it works. it seems to me to be quite labour intensive for members of parliament if they had 8 staffers. So, you know, it'll be just curious to see what the savings are, because at the same time, you'd be slamming the Albanese government if they weren't making considerable costs in relation to the deliverables of parliament.
Yeah.
And I would also say, you know, the Teals were often challenged about their views on issues beyond that which they wanted to talk about. The reality is that there is a lot that goes on in Parliament and in your role as an MP that isn't in line with the 2 things that you've got a platform on. You know, they need to realise that their role is bigger than their platform. They need to realise that going in, that it's going to be hard. They're going to have to get across a whole bunch of different things. They were challenged to demonstrate that they were able to do that. They ignored. So I think one of them said, you know, that's not my job to worry about tax issues or things of that nature. You do have to worry about that. And if you're not up to it with the staff that you've been allocated, maybe it's not the job for you.
Well, we did
Yeah.
from 6 independents in the previous parliament. So I'll embarrass myself with my math. That was 24 staff to now 16, which is 66. So the wages bill is a consideration. As we said, this has only been around since 2018 or 19, I think. So it did function well before that. Is this just the Teals having a hissy fit?
Green.
I don't think it is. I don't think the other thing too is it's not just the newly elected Teals. There are other independents who've been good and stable independents, which also benefits our side of, you know, the Conservative side of politics, that are being affected by this. And if an independent gets elected, and then, as Ryan says, you know, oh well, I don't know much about tax. That's actually an argument to make sure that they have someone there that is able to help them, so that they are up to speed and can make a value judgment on these things. It's a house of review, for Christ's sake. They're supposed to be there reviewing legislation and if you like, keeping the government either honest or otherwise. Now, I agree that if someone is so devoid of any understanding of other issues, perhaps they shouldn't be in politics. The fact is they got in on a single platform, and that happens for parties just as much as it happens for independents.
So it's really a case of educating the electorate as well, Ian. This is what worries me. The electorate does not realise the consequences of their votes last time round. There was clearly a lot of heat, a lot of passion in that voting, but was there a lot of intelligence and deep thought? And speaking as a lawyer, it really angers me when I hear people say, if I'm voting for anybody, I'm going to make sure they're not a lawyer in the Senate. And I'm thinking, well, actually, if anything, you would want a candidate who's got some legal nous about them to aspire to become a senator. You don't actually want people who get up on a single issue or a couple of issues, as Ryan has said.
Carolyn, I agree with you 100%. I think to a degree, without being rude to the rest of the population, there's a whole bunch of voters out there that are just sheep, right? They are just following what they think is the shepherd. And when it turns out to be a wolf in sheep's coat, then they've got a problem.
Yes.
And maybe Albanese, through this, is actually also potentially educating the public that these people aren't fit for office. But I agree with you, Ian, it's a bit of akin to managing a board. What you don't want on a board is a weak board member who doesn't understand their duties and obligations. There's nothing more frustrating in terms of deliverables for a business or for a not-for-profit if you have a board member who's ill-tuned to the environment.
Agreed.
I think you articulated it better than me, Caroline. I think that the key thing is that there are consequences to voting people into Parliament who don't have a structure behind them. And this is one of those consequences.
Now, as far as strategy goes, could this come back to bite Albanese or the Prime Minister, sorry, not meaning to be disrespectful, in that it could see the Teals coalesce as and pull their resources and become basically a voting bloc to try and get some sort of flagellation back on him? Could they use it as an excuse as to why they haven't been able to be effective rather than wearing their decisions going forward? We've been held back by this, because with the shadow ministers, it's not so important for me because they vote along party lines unless it's a conscious vote. You have your staff do the research in the caucus, goes forward, this is how we're going. We don't even have to do it. So are we being fair? Is it going to work for Albanese or is it not going to work for him?
The long time between now and the next election. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And honestly, the Teals could end up being a flash in the pan. They could be, you know, flavour of the month if they don't coalesce, as you say, Michael, if they don't actually start to think of themselves as a party and behave like a party, and to rejig who they are in terms of the voting populace. But I agree with Ryan. It's if they're not very careful, they're going to sound like they're bleating instead of saying. I think they've got to pick their fights, and I think they've got to articulate those fights very carefully.
One would
Go on, Ian, sorry.
on the basis that if you look at the two major parties, if I was an independent now, I would be arguing because they have a group of advisors advising on particular legislation, because it gets talked about in a party room and they decide, you know, the leaders of the party decide which way they're going to go on particular legislation and what the vote is going to be, you would argue that then 3/4 of Labor or Liberal don't need their extra staff because they don't have to do anything. They don't have to think at all. So that leaves an independent out on their own saying, now I agree with Ryan that if it makes the Australian population sit up and think about their vote, I'm all for it. The problem is I can't see that. I talk to people and I have friends who are politically aware, articulate, great. I have other friends who and some younger people I know, and by younger I mean just a generation before, in their 30s, who really are the I generation. It's an iPad, an iPhone, it's this, and they don't think about it. Or they just vote along, you know, family lines or whatever. My dad always voted for that, so I'm going to.
I think we're going to see something else. It doesn't matter now what's happening in government. You know, I was reading this morning some articles from overseas newspapers, and it's clearly we're heading into recession, and a big deep recession. So it doesn't matter what we argue right now here. The cost savings is going to occur on all levels, and this government is going to be. They will need to cut, you know, its staffers, not just the independents, but their own one, because the economical situation is deteriorating every day, and the costs need to be cut. So I believe that even Albanese in his party is going to be staff cuts as well.
They'll have to be, Mario.
I mean, it's a situation. It's bad. You know. Sorry, Ryan. Please continue.
No, please, Ian. I think.
Well, yes, I think Mario's right. We are heading for some seriously tough times.
And Victoria's going to be first on a chopping block, and then no question asked. You know, like look at what's happening in New South Wales. We have the now schools. You know, the teachers stop working, the trains don't work, nothing. It's every day. It's going to be more and more this disappointment. Doesn't matter who voted for who, and what way and for what reason. But the economical situation is going to now start dictating how the politicians are going to start saving the money as well on a staffers. You know, that was my just thought.
Yeah.
Well, the energy is going to be one of the big factors in terms of CPI, etc. I mean, look, fuel's gone through the roof. They're already saying that there's going to be shortages. They've got this zero emissions he's now gone for, the low pub he's now gone for, and they haven't actually said how they're going to do it. So it's as energy prices rise and people can't afford electricity, fuel for the car, etc. Then, and by the way, I think that'll then put pressure on a lot of those Teals, because a lot of them got in on green votes, on I'm going to change the planet. Well, change the planet, terrific. when we're all freezing in the dark, you're not going to be so happy about the changes you were going to make.
What people need somebody who is like a Ryan, calm, down on the earth politician who can talk to the constituents. Because I say from my personal experience, when the poverty hits, we can talk about this, and because people don't understand what it means to stand in a line for one day for the coffee, one day for the oil and the sugar, electricity, whatever it is. This government needs more, this people of Australia needs more like a Ryan. And this is not a paid advertising. I'm just saying because he always comes across to somebody who is calm and can articulate the message. And that's what the people need, not the staffers.
Mm.
In speaking in favour of a structured party rather than independent, the best advice I get as a member of an outer eastern suburb in Melbourne, when an issue comes up, I get in my party room the advice of good local members who represent people from Western Victoria, from Gippsland, inner city. These are good MPs who are on the ground talking to their constituents. I sometimes haven't got one clue about what a solar farm in Western Victoria means for the community out there. But when I sit in that party room and we discuss issues of legislation, I completely agree with Carolyn. Having some nous around how a bill is put together is really, really important. But beyond that, getting advice from my colleagues about what legislation means to their constituents gives me all the advice I need in terms of governing or being opposition, but representing all of Victoria. The Teals, whether you're Monique Ryan or whoever else, you will never be able to get the views of, as a federal member, people in Western Australia, people in Northern Queensland. In the Labor Party room and the Liberal Party room, you will get those views from all of your colleagues. It's just impossible for an independent who makes really impactful decisions that affect people from right across the nation. You will never get the input that you need to get. But as a member of a major party, you will get that input from your colleagues every day of the week, good local MPs who represent their communities, who are able to tell you what the impact is going to be of legislation and policy positions. And that's why I will always speak in favour of major parties over independents, because independents might hold the balance of power, but at the end of the day, they are not getting the input. It's impossible for them to get the input that they need to get to make the decisions that they're making.
Mm. Yeah.
And the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. And I just don't know whether they've fathomed that in the heat of the moment and riding on that tide of success. It's absolutely right what you say, Ryan, in terms of the power that belonging to a party has. I think they need to become a party and they need to become a political force to be reckoned with, or they need to realise that they're this, as I said, a flash in the pan.
Even if they coalesce, they're still only going to represent inner
very small
Sydney and Melbourne people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not going to be as diverse as the major parties in terms of their thinking.
True, yeah.
Will this empower the Greens, given that their extra ministers that they got up, members that they got up, now they have more advisors working as a group? Is this a positive for the Greens?
Getting any extra votes is going to be a positive for the Greens.
Greens, I mean, I would say that the Teals are cannibalising voters from the Greens. That's probably mostly where people are moving to and from. So I would say the Greens are viewing the Teals as their major opponents at the moment. So any extra staff that the Greens are able to pull they're probably going to be focused more on trying to get those inner city seats back rather than anything else.
Yeah. Now, have we entered topsy-turvy world, given the Andrews government in Victoria with his massive staff, massive public, I think we're the biggest public service in Australia. And here we have Albanese going, well, we need to cut back on the public service. We need to make savings. And one thing I would add, finally, we're seeing a productivity review that includes management. Instead of just trying to, how can we wring that extra bit out of the staff? Management are actually included in this productivity review. So where are we? Upside down, roundabout? I'm confused as to who, have Albanese suddenly become the Liberal Democrats. It's all about smaller government.
Yeah. No, it's not. I would take it back from my own point of view. leaving all the arguments, the other arguments we've discussed to one side. This is about scrutiny. This is about making sure that he can minimise the impact of the independents in the Senate. And I don't even want to back them. I mean, I wish they weren't there. But the point is, I'm more fearful of him having no scrutiny than I am of them being educated.
Well said. That's well said.
All right, team, we'll leave it there and we'll reconvene next week. So Caroline, Mario, Ryan and Ian, thanks so much for your time and insights.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thanks.